You open your freezer and cold air rolls over the back of your hand. That feeling, that specific ordinary cold, is the only reason anyone alive has ever seen a lion's whiskers from 28,000 years ago. Think about what your freezer actually does. It doesn't stop time. It doesn't preserve anything. All it does is slow down the things that eat you after you die. Bacteria stall, enzymes seize, rot gets put on pause. That's the whole trick. Cold isn't a shield, it's a delay. And north of the Arctic Circle, that same trick has been running without a plug, without a door, without anyone checking on it, for 40,000 years. Under roughly a quarter of the northern hemisphere, there is ground that never thaws. Not in summer, not through a warm decade. In parts of Siberia, it goes down more than a kilometer. Permafrost. And inside it, animals are lying exactly where they fell. Not as fossils. A fossil is stone, minerals that filled the space where an animal used to be. A rumor of a creature. These are bodies. Fur still attached to skin. Claws still sharp enough to catch on a glove. Eyelashes. Blood that was liquid enough, when a mammoth was recovered in 2013, that researchers caught it in a beaker as it ran out. Stomach contents you can spread on a table and sort by hand and identify plant by plant. You are not looking at the record of an animal. You are looking at the animal. And here's what nobody warns you about before you start going down this road. Not one of them died of the cold. Every single one was doing something ordinary when it stopped. Eating, walking, nursing, hunting. The ice arrived afterwards, and it arrived fast enough that nothing got the chance to rot, and nothing got the chance to be eaten. Which leaves a question nobody has fully answered, and we're going to spend the next half hour climbing towards it, one body at a time. What actually killed them? And the second question, the one that sounds smaller and is actually much larger. Why, after 2 centuries of finding almost nothing, is the ground suddenly handing them back, one after another, faster every single year? 4 of them. 4 animals that came out of that ice with their faces intact. Start with the one that started everything. Autumn, 1901. The Berezovka River in the far northeast of Siberia. A Cossack hunter working a riverbank that collapsed over the summer sees something sticking out of the exposed mud. Not a bone, not a tusk, a head. Word reaches St. Petersburg, and the Imperial Russian Academy of Sciences does something that reads today as slightly unhinged. They fund a full expedition in winter. They send 2 men, Otto Hertz and Eugen Feisenmeyer, across roughly 4,000 miles of frozen Siberia to go and dig it out. Understand what that meant in 1901. Rail as far as rail went, then river, then sled. Months of travel, in the dark, for an object that might already have rotted into the bank. When they reach the site, they face a problem nobody had needed to solve before. The animal is locked in frozen ground. Leave it, and the summer thaw destroys it. Dig it out fast, and it thaws unevenly. And a body frozen for tens of thousands of years does not thaw gracefully. It turns to slurry. Decay picks up exactly where it left off, because as far as the bacteria are concerned, no time has passed. So they build a wooden hut over the carcass, and inside the hut they light fires and they thaw the ground centimeter by centimeter, cutting away the softened mud and then waiting for the next layer to give. Which means these 2 men spent weeks living in a small enclosed shed with a thawing mammoth. Feisenmeyer wrote about the smell, repeatedly, at length. It is essentially a man describing being trapped indoors with the worst thing he has ever encountered. Of all the ways to earn a footnote in the history of science, that one was earned. But then the ground gave up what it was holding, and what they found rewrote the picture of the Ice Age that everyone in Europe was carrying around in their heads. The animal was sitting upright, not lying on its side the way a large animal settles when it dies slowly. Sitting. Front leg folded underneath the body, positioned as though it had been pushing, trying to lever itself back up off the ground. The damage told them why it couldn't. The pelvis was shattered. The right foreleg was broken. Ribs broken. This was not an animal that faded. It took catastrophic damage in seconds and then could not stand. And then they opened the mouth, between the teeth and the tongue. not swallowed, not digested, not passed into the stomach, were buttercups and grass, green, unchewed, still recognizable. Let that sit for a second. It was mid-chew. Now, here's what makes that finding so important, because it is not just a striking image. It demolishes an entire assumption. The picture nearly everyone carries is the same one: a doomed, shaggy animal wandering into a whiteout, lying down in deepening snow, slowly going still, a cold death, a slow one, a sad one. The Berezovka mammoth destroys that in one detail. You do not have a mouthful of fresh flowers in a blizzard. Buttercups means summer. Green grass in quantity means abundant food, everywhere, easy to reach. This animal was not starving on a frozen wasteland. It was standing in productive grassland on a warm day, eating well, in a landscape so rich it had a name of its own: the Mammoth Steppe, a dry grass plain that ran from Spain to Canada and carried more large animals per square mile than the Serengeti does now. Not a white desert, a prairie. And then, in a matter of seconds, it was on the ground with a crushed pelvis, and it never stood up again. Whatever happened was fast, violent, and completely unexpected, to the animal and to everyone who came looking for it 100,000 seasons later. If you're finding this as unsettling as I do, subscribe, because the next animal we pull out of this ice is preserved so completely that researchers could count its individual whiskers. And what it tells us about Ice Age predators is genuinely worse. So what does it? What breaks the pelvis of a 6-ton animal on a summer afternoon and then seals it perfectly for 39,000 years? Hertz and Feisenmeyer had a theory: a riverbank collapse, a sudden fall into a crevice or a mudslide, the animal trapped upright, suffocating under the weight, sealed in cold, saturated ground before anything could reach it. They were probably right about this one. What they didn't know was that they had just found the first member of a pattern. Every body pulled out of that ground for the next 120 years would tell a version of the same story. Doing something normal, then gone. The next one wasn't an accident. Before the next body, you need to know who actually finds these things, because it isn't scientists, and the reason it isn't scientists matters. International trade in elephant ivory is banned. Trade in mammoth ivory is not. No herd to protect, no poaching to stop. The tusks are legal, and there is real money in them, which has created one of the strangest industries on Earth. Every summer, men go out into the Siberian riverbanks with pumps and hoses, blast the thawing mud off cliff faces with high-pressure water, and wash out tusks. A single good pair can be worth more than a year of any other work available in the region. These aren't researchers. They're men doing extremely dangerous work in remote country, cutting into ground that is coming apart on its own. And every so often, while looking for ivory, they hit something that isn't ivory. 2017, the Semyuliak River in Yakutia, about 700 miles from where Hertz and Feisenmeyer built their hut. A team cuts into a wall of frozen mud, and there's fur in it. Not a bone poking out. Fur. Golden brown, matted, still soft enough to move when you touch it. They keep digging, and what comes out is a cave lion cub. Whole. Eyes, ears, nose, paws, individual claws, curled up in the position an animal takes when it is sleeping somewhere it feels safe. They name him Boris. The next year, almost the same spot, the same kind of work, turns up a second cub, a female, and she is better. Her name is Sparta, and as of right now, she is the best preserved Ice Age animal ever recovered from anywhere on the planet. When the team led by Love Delaine at Stockholm's Center for Paleogenetics, working with Albert Protopopov of the Yakutian Academy of Sciences, published on her in 2021, the description read less like paleontology and more like a veterinary intake form. Fur, intact. Teeth, intact. Soft tissue, intact. Internal organs, present and in position. Whiskers, countable individual whiskers, still rooted in the skin around a mouth that last opened somewhere around 28,000 years ago. She was between 1 and 2 months old. Her milk teeth hadn't finished coming through. She had never hunted, never been alone, and had almost certainly never been more than a few meters from her mother. And now, here's the detail that should stop you. Boris and Sparta were found roughly 15 meters apart. Everyone's first assumption was the obvious one. Litter mates. Same den, same disaster, same afternoon. 2 cubs from one family. They were not. Radiocarbon dating put around 15,000 years between them. 15,000 years. That is roughly the distance between the last mammoths dying out and you standing in your kitchen with the freezer door open. 2 unrelated animals, 2 entirely separate deaths, 15 millennia apart, ending up close enough to touch. Because that patch of ground has been swallowing bodies and filing them away for longer than our species has had cities or writing. The permafrost isn't a graveyard. A graveyard implies burial, ceremony, intent. This is a filing system. It takes whatever falls into it, drops it into a drawer, and holds it in order. And here's the part about Sparta that keeps the question open. A healthy, well-fed cub, only weeks old, dies, and her body is left completely untouched. No scavenging, no tooth marks. Nothing came to eat her in a landscape absolutely full of things that ate. That does not happen out in the open. Out in the open, you are gone in a day. Something had to bury her, fast. And while we're here, the name is wrong. Twice. Cave lion. A name repeated so often it stopped sounding like a claim and started sounding like a fact. They didn't live in caves. We call them cave lions because the first bones turned up in European caves. And bones turn up in caves for a boring reason. Caves are where bones survive, sheltered from weather, from scavengers, from the freeze-thaw cycles that grind everything else into powder. They lived out in the open, on the mammoth steppe, in the wind, in the grass, in the same landscape the Berezovka mammoth was eating in. And the second thing the name gets wrong is the picture in your head. The males had no manes. Every museum model, every documentary reconstruction, every illustration you have ever seen of a cave lion with a great dark ruff around its face, that is a guess. Somebody took a modern African lion and put it in a heavier coat. We know it's wrong because the people who actually saw them drew them. In 1994, 3 cavers in southern France felt air moving through a gap in a cliff face. They cleared it, dropped down, and landed in a chamber sealed for more than 20,000 years. Chauvet Cave. On the walls are some of the oldest paintings ever found. And on one panel, there is a group of lions, drawn by somebody who had watched them, not imagined them, watched them. They're hunting. Shoulders low, heads forward, eyes fixed on something outside the frame. Long bodies, flat, wide faces, small, rounded ears. No manes, not one on any of them. We spent 2 centuries reconstructing an animal out of bone fragments and guesswork. A person with a piece of charcoal got it right the first time, from life. But Sparta doesn't answer the question we started with. She deepens it. We still don't know what buried her. The next body is the one where you finally get to see the predator and the prey in the same frame. Because for once, we can prove who was standing over the corpse. 2010, the Oyogos Yar coast on the Laptov Sea, on the northern edge of Siberia. A juvenile mammoth comes out of a cliff of frozen mud, around 39,000 years old. Strawberry blonde hair, still attached, still running the length of her body. They call her Yuka. That coast is now the shore of the Arctic Ocean. 39,000 years ago, it wasn't a coast at all. Sea levels were far lower, and the land kept going north for hundreds of miles. Yuka didn't die by the ocean. She died in the middle of a country that no longer exists. And down her flank and across her shoulders, there are marks. Parallel scratches, deep ones. Not scuffs from the ground, and not damage from the excavation. Spaced like a paw, running in the direction a paw travels when it is dragging down a moving body. Cave lion, almost certainly. The pattern of the claw marks and the damage lines up with an ambush from behind on a young animal that had drifted away from the herd, which is exactly how you take down something that outweighs you by several tons. You don't fight it. You wait for it to be alone, you get behind it, and you make it fall. So there's the story, and it's good on its own. The first direct physical evidence of an Ice Age lion attacking a mammoth. Not inferred from bones, not modeled, written on the skin. A lion caught her. She went down. The ground took her. Except that isn't the story. Because when researchers looked more closely at that body, they found something on it that no lion could have made. Something that doesn't come from a claw or a tooth or a fall or 39,000 years underground. Straight cuts, clean-edged, made with an edge, in a pattern no tooth and no claw produces. Because teeth tear and claws rake, and neither of them draws a line. And parts of her were missing. The skull, most of the leg bones. Not chewed through, not dragged off in pieces the way a scavenger works a carcass. Removed, separated deliberately, in the way you take something apart when you intend to carry it somewhere. So reassemble the afternoon. A young mammoth is brought down by a cave lion, or by more than one. The lion starts feeding. And then something else arrives. And whatever it is, the lion decides not to argue with it. By the time everyone has left, the heaviest and most useful parts of that carcass have gone somewhere else entirely. 39,000 years ago, on a plain that is now the bottom of the Arctic Ocean, a human being walked up to a lion's kill and took it. Sit with the nerve that required. You are a soft, slow, clawless animal, a fifth of the weight of the thing you are walking towards, and you have decided the correct move is to walk directly at a feeding lion and make it back off. That is not a fossil. That is a witness statement. And it changes what the ice actually preserved here. Not an animal, a scene, with a victim, a killer, and a third party who showed up, took what they wanted, and left. And here's what makes it important. If humans were standing over lion kills 39,000 years ago, then everything you picture as prehistoric was happening in a landscape that already had us in it. There is no clean before. Which raises a question the ice is about to answer in the worst possible way. Because there was something else out on that steppe with us. Something we were taught died out long before any human ever saw it. We were taught wrong. 2014. Back at the Simuliak River, the same riverbank system that would later give up Boris and Sparta, a hunter pulls a small animal out of the mud, covered in strawberry blonde hair. It's a baby woolly rhinoceros, around 7 months old, roughly 34,000 years, the only one ever found. Her name is Sasha. Woolly rhinos are the animal everybody forgets. You know mammoths, you know saber-toothed cats, but the woolly rhino was there the entire time, across the whole of northern Eurasia, and almost nobody can picture one. So picture one properly. 2.5 tons, built low and heavy, under a coat thick enough to hold body heat at 40 below. 2 horns, one behind the other, and the front horn is the thing, over 1 meter long on a full-grown adult, but not a spike, flattened side to side, like a blade. It looks wrong until you look at the wear. It's worn down on one side only. That's not fighting damage. Fighting damage is chipped tips and cracks. Even wear on one flat face over years is what you get from sweeping, side to side, across the ground. The horn was a snow shovel, an animal that spent its entire life clearing snow off grass using its own face. 2.5 tons of muscle and hair with a shovel bolted to the front of its head. Honestly, respect. And Sasha, 7 months old, already had the beginnings of one. Still soft, still growing. She had inherited a tool for a world she never got old enough to work. But Sasha isn't the reveal. Sasha is the doorway to the reveal. And the reveal is about her enormous cousin. Because there was another animal on that steppe. Bigger, much bigger. And everything you have ever been told about when it lived is wrong by a factor of 5. Elasmotherium sibericum, the Siberian unicorn. 4.5 meters long, around 3.5 tons, comparable to a small elephant. long-legged, built for running rather than lumbering, in a way no living rhino is, and a single horn, mounted on a great dome of thickened bone in the middle of the skull that may have stood over a meter tall. We don't have the horn itself. Horn is keratin, it doesn't fossilize. What we have is the mounting, a boss of bone on the forehead so heavy and so obviously load-bearing that something very large was sitting on it. Now, everything written about this animal for most of the last century put it in the deep past. Extinct around 200,000 years ago, gone long before modern humans reached the north. A creature from a completely different chapter of the world, with no overlap with us at all, the way a triceratops has no overlap with us. In 2018, a team including Adrian Lister at the Natural History Museum in London published new radiocarbon dates on it in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. Not 200,000 years, around 39,000. Think about what that actually means. 39,000 years ago, people were living right across Europe and Northern Asia. The Chauvet painters were about to pick up their charcoal. Neanderthals were still alive, just. Somebody on the Oyagos Yar plain was walking up to a lion and taking a mammoth off it. And out on the same grass, a 3.5-ton animal with a single horn on its forehead was still walking around. The old date wasn't a lie. It was a limit. Older techniques on poor samples had put the animal outside the range where anyone thought to look again. It wasn't hidden in the deep past. It was filed there, and nobody rechecked the file. The unicorn is not a myth that turned out to be false. It's an animal we shared a world with, and then lost so completely that when the story of it survived, we filed the story under fantasy. Let that sink in. We didn't invent the unicorn. We forgot it. Then we reinvented it, badly, as something with a horse's body and a spiral horn, when the real thing was a 3-ton grazer that could probably have run you down. Which raises the question this whole thing has been circling. If they were all still here that recently, humans, lions, unicorns, mammoths, standing on the same grass in the same century, then what removed them? The ice has one more animal to hand over before we get to that. And this one isn't intact. It's just ahead. 2018, the Tyrek River, Yakutia. A tusk hunter working a thawing bank sees fur again. He starts pulling. What comes out of the mud is a wolf's head, severed at the neck. Nothing else. No body, no forelimbs, no trace of the rest of it anywhere in the surrounding ground. Roughly 40,000 years old, fur still lying flat, ears still standing up, teeth still white in the jaw. Albert Protopopov, the same researcher who worked on the cave lion cubs, got it into cold storage and onto a scanner. The scan found something almost nobody expected at that age. The brain was still in there. Not a cavity, not a stain where a brain used to be. Tissue, holding its shape, sitting in the skull where it had been sitting since before Chauvet was painted. The head is about 40 centimeters long, dramatically larger than a modern gray wolf's. When the size was announced, a lot of coverage jumped straight to dire wolves and mythologized giants. It isn't that. What it actually is happens to be sadder. Ancient DNA work, including analysis involving Louv Delane's group, has increasingly shown that the wolves living across Siberia in that window belong to lineages that simply do not exist anymore. Not ancestors of anything. A branch that grew, spread right across the top of the world, and then ended. Here's why that matters to you specifically. There is, statistically, a dog within 100 meters of you right now. Every dog on Earth descends from wolves, but not from these ones. The lineage that became every retriever, every terrier, every sheepdog, every street dog in every city on the planet came from a different population entirely. These wolves were the alternative, the version of the story where it went another way. And they lost. All of them. Not one line survived. That's 4 animals out of the ice. A mammoth mid-chew, a cub whose milk teeth hadn't come through, a 7-month-old rhino, a wolf that was the last of something. And every one of them tells the same story from a different angle, doing something ordinary, then nothing. But here's the thing nobody tells you, and it's the thing that turns all of this from a curiosity into something you should probably care about. Stop asking what killed them. Ask why now, because the pattern isn't random. The Berezovka mammoth was 1901, and then, for most of a century, almost nothing. Fragments, partials, a tusk here, a foot there. Then, Sasha, 2014, Uyan and Dina, 2015, Yuka through the 2010s, Boris, 2017, Sparta, 2018, the wolf head, 2018, and a steady stream since, faster every year, to the point where Yakutian researchers now openly describe struggling to keep up with what's coming out of the ground. It is not because we got better at looking. Nobody invented a mammoth detector. The ground is opening. And in the summer of 2016, on the Yamal Peninsula, the far north got a demonstration of what that actually means. An unusual heat wave hit the tundra. Ground that had been solid for generations went soft. And an old reindeer carcass, buried there since a die-off decades earlier, thawed. The anthrax spores inside it had not died when the animal did. Spores don't work like that. They wait indefinitely. The outbreak killed thousands of reindeer, hospitalized dozens of people, and killed a child. Russia flew troops in biohazard suits onto the tundra and airlifted families out. Now, hold that next to something published 2 years earlier. In 2014, Jean-Michel Claverie and Chantal Abergel at the CNRS in Marseille took a sample of Siberian permafrost dated to roughly 30,000 years old. They found a virus in it. Then, they introduced it to living cells. It infected them. Pithovirus sibericum. 30,000 years in the ground, and still fully capable of doing the one thing a virus does. Claverie's point was never that this particular virus threatens you. It targets amoebas, not people. His point was simpler and worse. If a 30,000-year-old pathogen can come out of that ground intact and functional, then the belief that the deep past is safely sealed away isn't a fact, it's an assumption. So change the frame. You have been picturing permafrost as a museum, somewhere that keeps beautiful things for us, carefully, in the dark, until we're ready to see them. It isn't a museum, it's a lid. Everything you've marveled at for the last half hour, the whiskers, the buttercups, the strawberry blonde hair, the brain still sitting in the skull, came out from under it. Which leaves exactly one question worth asking. Not what's already been found, what's still down there? Yakutia, present day, about 600 kilometers northeast of the city of Yakutsk. There is a hole in the ground here you can see clearly from orbit. The Batagaika crater, roughly a kilometer across at its widest, and around 100 meters deep at the head wall. From the air, it looks like a stingray, or a wound. From the rim, the exposed face is a striped cliff of frozen sediment running down through layer after layer of time. The Yakutian people who live nearest to it don't call it a research site. They call it the gateway to the underworld, and they avoid it. It started as something almost trivial. Forest was cleared here in the mid-20th century. The trees had been shading the ground. Without them, the sun reached the permafrost, and a small depression formed. That was the entire beginning, a patch of cleared trees and some sunlight. It has been widening ever since, faster now than at any point in its history. Tens of meters a year at the fastest edges, the head wall retreating as the ice melts and the ground above collapses after it. And as it eats backwards into the hillside, it delivers. A bison, a horse, mammoth remains. Not excavated, presented. The crater digs them up and leaves them at the bottom. That is the answer to why now. The Berezovka mammoth took 2 men, an imperial grant, 4,000 miles of sled travel, and a shed full of fires. Today, a man with a hose walks a riverbank and finds a cave lion. Nothing changed about our looking. Everything changed about the ground. Every one of these animals, the mammoth mid-chew, the cub with her milk teeth, the 7-month-old rhino, the head with the brain still in it, is not a gift from the past. It's a symptom. Each one is a receipt for heat that has already been delivered to the top of the world. And here's the part that closes the loop. We were never really asking what killed them. We know roughly what killed them. A warming world at the end of the last ice age that dismantled the grassland they depended on, plus a new predator that had learned to walk up to a lion and take its dinner. Climate and us. That's the honest answer. And the honest answer includes admitting that we still argue about the ratio between those two, and probably always will. The real question was never how they died, it's what preserved them, and whether that thing is still preserving anything. Because that's the thing about a freezer. It isn't a fact about the world, it's a condition. It holds only for as long as something keeps holding it. Stop feeding it energy, or start feeding it heat, and everything inside comes back at once. All of it, together, on a schedule you don't control. For 40,000 years, the Arctic ran the largest cold storage facility that has ever existed. It held a lion's whiskers. It held liquid blood. It held a mouthful of flowers picked on a warm afternoon before our species had built a single wall. It is now unloading. So go back to where we started. Your hand, the open door, the cold rolling out over your skin. That mammoth had flowers in its mouth. It was standing in green grass on a summer day, doing the most ordinary thing an animal can do. It had no idea it was living in the last chapter. Nothing about that afternoon felt like an ending. Neither does yours. You're doing exactly what that animal was doing. Living inside a set of conditions so stable you've stopped seeing them as conditions at all. Warm enough, fed, ground solid underfoot. A world that holds. The only difference between you and the animal in the ice is that you get to know. The ice kept them for 40,000 years, and it kept them for us. And now it's handing them back, one at a time, and nobody gets to choose what comes out next.